Hey, 8 o'clock on the dot. I like to start things. I like to experiment with this camera. It's so weird. It's a weird thing. Um, yeah. So today, I'm gonna focus on authentication stuff in Node.js. But for some reason, every time I do a stream, I find some kind of article that I want to start with. So that's what I'm gonna start with. So you can see here that Node has added the ability to strip types. Uh, and just for fun, we'll use that today. I have constantly been annoyed by this, that you need to have some kind of either a bundler or run TypeScript and then run the JS afterwards. So that's pretty neat and fresh. Yeah, let me pull myself to a small guy. Great. And bear with me as I remember how to do everything. Cool. There, perfect. So I'll kind of keep it as bare bones as I can, but I also won't go like to the middle. And so to start things off, we can npm init a project, and that'll make us that. And then, like I said, we'll use this new experimental type stuff. I believe so. Earlier, I had to install the nightly version to get access to it using nvm. So that's the version that I'm on. And let's see here. So first guy, simply install Express. Express. On 1000 maybe. And send maybe. I think it'll automatically do HTML. We'll find out. And now somewhere I use this. Perfect. Oh, okay, so I'm not even using types, so it doesn't matter. Well, but I am using TS. Let's see what it does without it. I think this will work. Perfect. No, file extension. So at the very least, that'll get around that. Interesting. Does not do what I want it to do. And that does. Well, that's already not working as I would want. So great start to that one. Anyways, so we'll just ignore that. I wasn't planning on using types pretty much at all, so it doesn't matter. And what we can do is cool. So we have a basic server. And try not to do this with any kind of like frameworks or what do you call those? Like templates, just so you kind of like see how everything pulls together. Okay. So I guess the first thing, I don't have a good drawing app, otherwise I might draw this out, but essentially, and what happened to my camera? This is useless sometimes. Is it frozen? Seems like it. please hold while this learns to work correctly. Oh, I didn't want the full screen. Ay, ay, ay. Screen capture, yeah. Okay, and then maybe I'll just have to manually put myself in. OBS has really been shitting the bed for me lately, and it's extremely frustrating. Okay, so I'm just gonna slap myself somewhere over here. Sure. Okay. So basically we're gonna make a sign up page, and that sign up page will then lead to really just a page to prove that the person is kind of logged in. And then we'll probably separately make a login page to then use that sign up. And depending on how it goes, I'll do it in kind of like stages of success, I guess, where for proper authentication, you obviously need some kind of like user object. And so we can kind of like go into that a little bit. The most basic version of kind of like signing up we can go through, and then sessions, and then maybe we'll pull together how you actually use that to detect that a user exists. I'll also probably try to keep it all to this file, even though I wouldn't normally do that in a real project. It just makes it easier when kind of showing. So if we're making a sign up page, let's make a sign up page. Let's sign up. We could probably, let's just make a folder, and Express lets us do, is this what I want? It should be fine. I haven't done a fresh Express project in a very long time. Is this? Yeah, it does. I might be able to get rid of that. And then here we would have sign up HTML. And this just makes it a little bit easier to write. So so let's assume I did that correctly, which is a large assumption. Oh, it doesn't auto reload. I thought it has it. Okay. Maybe I can do that. No, it's gotta have HTML. Okay. And so here we'll need a basic form, an input, and that's going to be we'll do it by username instead of email, just so I don't have to type in a full email. We'll do password, and then put type equals password. That, let's see, that's automatically a string, and sure. Okay, so that's our username, that's our password. For clarity, we can throw one of these on. Nothing about this is going to be about the UI, so ignore it. Okay, so we got that now. And the thing that always gets me somehow is actually submitting this form, which already I think I might abort this static, because what we can do instead is, let's find out, post sign up. very much the raw version of this tutorial as I figure out what I would do in a more streamlined version. Make this method post action sign up. Let's find out. Send. Here we'd probably redirect them to, let's just call it dashboard. Should be, but Express is weird and you need to add that. So this will make sure that the form submission, so this form gets these properties correctly added to Rectopy if you're not familiar with Express. Undefined extended, provide extended option. Okay, so test is my username, test my, well, you know what we need. Submit. Test, submit. Cool. So here we can see that that form was correctly posted to this route. It also redirected us to the dashboard, and we got this guy here. So we have kind of like the start of our connection here. And what we want to do is, so kind of like, if there's any important thing to take out of this, it's that the password cannot be saved in plain text. That's number one. But I think what some people don't realize is that your password is sent up in plain text originally, and so at some point the application knows what it was, and then it encrypts it and then stores it encrypted. So to do that, there is a package on npm called bcrypt. This is probably the most standard one. Bcrypt.js. Did they? Okay, but the thing that I find, so this one is the native version. I believe there's a JS version. Yeah. Which that's not shocking. So the JS version has more downloads than the native one, because getting this thing to install correctly is just a pain in the butt. Just really unenjoyable. So instead, we'll bring this one in. It's slower, but it doesn't matter for pretty much anything that you're doing. Okay, and then here in the docs, we can see a few things, and I'll need to remember what it even is. Is it just hash? Salt length to generate salties. I think so. So sign up. And then async. So this is async. I'm pretty sure this bcrypt.js version, it's not actually async because it runs it in JavaScript. And so even though it's a promise that they just did that to keep the same API as the native one, and the native one actually properly pulls it off into a separate thread. Okay, so we're hashing the rec.body.password. And then what we'll do for now is save that and then just log it out so you can see. here, here. Great. Nailed that one. String, comma, undefined. Probably means this guy wants salt length to generate. So I thought they put a default. So 10 is one they use, 8. I thought they gave a recommendation where, here it is, default to 10. Interesting. So this one defaults it and this one doesn't. So if I were to change this, which again doesn't actually make it any different, this should work. Great. So now you can see this is what comes out. And so this is what you actually store in your database. And then you'll see here these dollar signs. If I remember correctly, and maybe they will specify it somewhere here, maybe in the original one. Here it is. Prefix bcrypt hashes. So this kind of tells you what kind of bcrypt hash it is. And then this $10 should be telling you. Just trying to see if they explain it at all. So this does a decent job of kind of explaining like what's even the purpose of the rounds. Essentially, like the rounds kind of slow down how many hashes you can test. Here we go. Okay, so this tells you the hash algorithm, and both of those indicate bcrypt. Cost represents the exponent used to determine how many iterations, and so that's essentially the number of rounds. And then here you'll see the 16-byte salt and then a 24-byte hash. So the first 22 characters, as they're showing here, are the salt, and so that's up to here. And the hash value is from here. And the purpose of the salt is essentially, without a salt, anyone who hashed the same text, so if two people had the password test, their like hashes without a salt would come to the exact same thing. So perhaps both of them would have a hash value of this. But basically with the salt, what effectively happens, so let's maybe, I don't want to count mine. What happens is it takes the salt, and effectively what's happening is instead of hashing just the password, what's really getting hashed is, let's put it this. I think this is even exactly how they do it. They put the salt before the item, and then now when you hash this, you're going to get something totally different, even though the password is the same. So if two people use the password test, then because their salt is going to be different, the hash itself is going to be completely different. And so historically speaking, like there was a time before salts were invented, and essentially what you could do, because we all know that database hacks occur frequently, is they would get a list of, well, you could do it multiple ways. Is either you just can see which people have used the same password, or I think the other one, it's called a rainbow table attack. Who's got a good. Yeah, sure. Essentially, what they could do is generate a rainbow table. And so they'd run through all possibilities. It's not really a good picture here. I don't really love that. There you go. So this is even just explaining the defense against rainbow tables, which is the salt. But essentially a person could go through and try every single combination using the specific hashing function, and then they could just compare. They now have a map to say, okay, cool, this fake password completes to this hash, and then they compare those hashes against what's in the database, and then they basically determine what your password is. By adding a salt, the salt increases the length effectively of the item that's hashed. And then, how did they describe it? Include large salts. It's not secret, but maybe generated at random. Showing that each user's password is hashed uniquely. Users of the same passwords can have different password hashes, like I said. We'll need to pre-compute tables for each possible salt value. Exactly, yeah. Yeah. Anyways, that's just a little bit of security history. So let's get back to what we had. This gives us our hash password. Go kind of one or two ways. So I can start with sessions, but if I've already done the hash password stuff, I think what I'll do is we'll actually store that password in some kind of a user document, and then we'll allow ourselves to log in using it. And for simplicity, it should be fine. Just gonna store our users just right like this. And so we'll have users.push. In a real environment, you would use some kind of a database to store this, because as soon as this process reloads, we're going to lose all of these users. But for our demo purposes, that's totally fine. And so here we add one with the username, which will match the body's username. And then you can either store it as password, or sometimes I store it explicitly as hashed password, because you just don't want to confuse yourself. Do not store this password. Which similarly, don't feel like you want to do something like this, because this will throw that password into that object. So now that is stored, redirect them here. But let's actually redirect them to login. HTML. Very similar looking page, except we'll change the action to go to login. So still requires the username and password, and then they submit. And now we add a login route. And so now we kind of reverse what we did basically. There's still going to be a password on the body, and we want to compare it. And so string to compare. So this is the string that we want to compare, and then this is the hash itself. So first comes the password, and then the hash will be, and this is going to be a little bit weird, but basically users find user name. Okay, so this is basically doing a find where the username matches what the person typed in. And so now we pushed a user once we've signed up. It's now in the array. This will find the one by that username so that when we're comparing against only the hash password of the user that matches that username. I believe this returns a Boolean, yeah. So then we'd have password matches. And then you can make this as robust or not robust as you want, but let's just say do a send stats 400 if the password doesn't match. And then if it does, so let's carry it from the last one. That to be dashboard HTML. For simplicity, I think I might need to make that an express route. So these are just basic HTMLs. There's no like server-side rendering. But just to showcase a basic example of how to determine if somebody's logged in, I'll make a separate route for it. And so for now, this will just be dashboard, but we'll add some stuff after it. Okay. Direct. Fix succeeds. Okay, so if we come back here, close those guys down. Somewhere here, great. So create this test user. And so now that should be inside the users. Took us right to login, which I didn't change this text. Should not have restarted the server. So in theory, you can check the network log here. Submit that and redirect me. So that redirect confirms that it came through the password matched and it redirected. Now, if I were to have done just a totally wrong password, you should get, yeah, a 400. And so depending on like your UI, your library, your React, all that jazz, you can kind of like detect that more properly to go, oh, okay, well, with the 400 error, then we'll present an error in the UI. But for now, I'm just trying to focus on kind of like the back end aspect of all of this. Okay, so now kind of what I'd like to do is we'll basically add whose dashboard this is, and that will just be the person's username. So when successful, it should look something like this. Except I've hard coded that. So what we would like to do is have some concept of a session. And so when this person comes through, logs in, we're going to store that login information in a session. And I'm trying to decide session.user. I think we could, well, again, I'll take all of this and add in some of the like more typical Express libraries, but we'll do it like very raw first. And so what we can do now is we've confirmed after this point that the password matches, and we'll create a session. And let's see here. That session's going to have, I would think, some kind of an ID. Make it terrible, and it will be the length, like every new session will create a new ID. definitely not the way you would actually do it, but that's fine. And then store the username on that session. And so, yeah, sure, we can do that. Will be username. And then importantly now, cookie, put that on a cookie, and I always forget how to do that. Is that sure? Name and value. So, you know what? I don't even think we needed a session because we could, in one version of this, we could just put, let's try that. We'll start with that. Sorry, let's make this even more confusing in description. So we could just put the username on a cookie itself, and then I'll explain why that's a bad idea. So we'll start with something that works, but isn't the way I would suggest doing it. I'll explain why. So we put that on the cookie, and then we should be able to get here is I never remember param dictionary string remember. Huh? Pretty sure you don't need that anymore. Let's just see. Cookies dot name. Okay, that's all it is. So then this is dot username. And so first one, define reading username. Okay, I think that might be because, yeah, when using the cookie parser. So we do need to bring this guy in. And to use it, cookie parser app.use. Stuck. Interesting. Probably to do that. Great. So now we get undefined because that cookie has not been set. To here, and we log in. Interesting. Properties of undefined. Oh, right, because we reloaded, so that user no longer exists. So that makes sense. Okay, so we'll actually make that user again, and we'll log in. Boom. Now we're in the dashboard, and it's correctly picking that up. So you can see here that that username is there. Now, why you wouldn't ever do that is people can just supply whatever cookies they want in a request. So if somebody, not that this has any secure information, but if you were using this to know, oh hey, this is who this user is, anybody in their browser could just come in, modify this value, and then send that. I'm curious if, does it let me do that from here? No, but there is at the very, oh, hello. There we go. Look at that. So that's basically what a person could do. So especially if you did something like, let's say explicitly user ID, like whatever, 123. If you're taking that value off of the cookie and then saying, okay, cool, like this guy tells me he's this user, so I'm going to let him have access to that user stuff, you're going to have problems. And that is essentially where sessions come into play. And I think it's just going to be better to not do it this way, and instead we'll use an actual session library. I think that's just far intelligent. And I believe this is kind of the most common for Express. Yep. So we'll install that. And let's see here. All the defaults should be fine. Okay, so that should be what we need essentially. And right here, let's go over what these things mean. So resave forces the session to be saved back to the session store, even if the session was never modified during the request. Store this may be necessary, but also create a transition, blah, blah, blah. Default value is true. Stores if it implements the touch method. If it does, you can safely set. If it does not, interesting. Okay, so we will learn whether we need that in a second. Save uninitialized. It's to be saved to the store. When it is new but not modified using false, is useful for implementing login sessions. Reducing server storage, complying with laws that require permission before setting a cookie. Default will change in the future. Sounds like we actually do false. And then cookies we can't do secure on localhost, but you would do this once you actually deploy it. And then this secret, ideally you would actually, we can do it real quick too. Add that here, so you'd have some kind of session secret that you put in your env. This would be some properly randomly generated thing. Maybe there's one. And then I think Node actually allows you to. Oh, right. Here would be good. And just for testing purposes, we'll make sure it's actually doing it correctly. Two S's. Cool. So this confirms that that's picking up that guy. So that. And now using express session. And then let's just talk a little bit about what this does and see if it describes it well enough. Okay, so it saying we don't need the cookie parser anymore, so we'll ditch that. Okay, so the default server-side session storage is a memory store. So that's very similar to what we had been doing previously with this. We'll use it for now, and that's probably actually where I will leave it. Just so I don't have to get into kind of the whole database side of things, and I'm trying to keep this under an hour. But we should be able to see, what I really want to see and show is what it actually stores. So I'm curious. Gets the max age. Okay, so then way below here, they specify all the stores that are possible. And so for myself, like I typically am default to Mongo. So you can just follow that package. But if you're SQLite, it's another one, Postgres, Redis, pretty much whatever you need. And let's even throw that into the mix. Interesting, I thought I might have commented something. Okay. So now what we can do, because this is running as middleware, is on our login, which technically speaking, we can actually do on sign up. So I've shown how this works. This would be a person coming back after they've signed up. But for like speed of testing, I'll put this in the sign up. And so what you can do is there's this new session that becomes available. And let's say user. User will be, again, here's where we need actually an ID. I really don't want you to do this as the thing. And so who this user is will be and any kind of database you're using is going to generate you this ID for free. I'm just doing this to have one. And so now we've stored that ID here on the session. And I'm pretty sure it's rec, not res. Let me see if that's true. And now that middleware will do some magic. So it'll make sure that this gets stored in the session itself, so that when we come around here, instead of this, I think we'll just log out the entire session to see what it looks like. So for now, we'll just make empty. And that means we go back to sign up. Done this right, this should now, let's go straight to the dashboard. Because now we've set the session immediately after sign up, which is what I would suggest doing, because if they've signed up, they are that person. Once you get deeper into things, you probably want some kind of verification that this person is who they are, though depends on kind of what your service is. If you want it to be semi-anonymous, having somebody just put in a username is okay. And then I'll talk about a few other issues there afterwards. So we can clear these cookies now. Those are useless. And submit this, and cool. So it took me in. Perfect. This is what I wanted to see. So because I put that debug session in, it kind of tells you everything that's happening. Expires user 0. Perfect. So it's saying, okay, cool, no SID sent, and I'll show you what that means. Generating session, and it says saving blah blah blah. Presumably this is I would guess the ID of that session. Yeah, you can see it right here. So that's the ID of the session itself. Similar to that hash, presumably this is some kind of like thing to identify what kind it is. And then very likely this is, I'm going to guess some base 64 encoded thing, but let's try. Oh, it's not. Okay, then it's probably hashed in some form, possibly with the session ID. Oh, you know what? I'm done. It's gonna be hashed with the session secret. So I don't know how to fully showcase that, but basically, so when we pass up rec.session.user, much like you see here, this is kind of what the session turns out to be. And what that middleware is essentially doing is it will hash that object, store it here, and then all of this. Is that true though? Because really, it's also storing that information in memory here. So I'm actually not, I do believe this has the information, but I'm curious why it does in the first place. Do they answer that question here or not? It's not extremely relevant. Sometimes I just like to know. Generate. Let me do a quick check here. So we take this whole thing. I like to just make it work. What? Did it hide the period? Two F notes just earlier. Okay. Session ID signature. Oh, interesting. Okay, that makes so much sense. Great. I'm glad I asked that question. So this comes back to the same problem. Somebody could just randomly generate a session ID and then slap that into their cookie, and then they could say, hey, I'm this person. But this signature basically says, like, the server hashes this session ID using its secret and then generates this guy. And that would then require, I mean, technically speaking, a person could attempt to also randomly guess this, but they're now trying to randomly guess this plus this, which is going to be computationally, like, basically impossible. So more likely the only way they could do that is if they have access to the secret. And so effectively that means that, like, obviously the secret needs to remain secret, but that should be pretty obvious considering it's called secret. Okay, so we still need to do the last piece. So now we know that there's a user on that session. With this debug stuff, it's kind of interesting because you can still see this touching. And so here in the cookies now you'll see connect.sid. And this is that same value that it's spitting out here. And you're saying like set cookie, so that's how it got set. And now it's stored and sent on every request because of that. And the touching expires session. Interesting. Okay, well, if it's session, then that's fine. Sometimes you can specify a max age. And so session would mean, I think session is as soon as, let's find out. I think even if I close it and then come back, I should still be session, yeah. But if I close the entire browser, let's find out. Testing my own knowledge here. I think, yeah, it's now gone. Versus if we did so max age in milliseconds. So we can do max age. We'll make it dramatic and see if that works. So assume that's where that goes. Cookie.max age. No, it's not. So we'll make that false, and then max age we'll set to 5 seconds. Now we need to sign up again. Now it got created, but here you'll see that max age 15:52:12, and it's already gone because we passed those 5 seconds. If we make that a little bit longer now, so I put it to a minute. Now here it should still be available. Yep. And imagine if I were to modify it in any way, this expiry would get extended. Okay, so finally, let's get this to do something actually useful. So now we have that user ID. We can do similar to where we found it by username. We can do find ID, so ID equals session.user. And then that's found the actual user themselves. So we should be able to do this. Now that cookie has expired, so let's just nix this. Now we'll have to re-log in. And now it knows who I am using an actual session. So that is the start of the way to know who a user is when kind of presenting data. And then just as a tiny example of like something that actually like modifies data and how to use this to actually check that. What's a simple thing we can do? I guess we can put a silly count on our guy. So post action equals, what do I want to call this? That's what we'll call it. And same thing, we can find who that user is. And then let's say we didn't find a user and we say, okay, cool. realistically speaking, we probably do the same thing here. So if I were to clear this cookie, if I come here, I get a bad request because that user doesn't exist. And then here now in the increment, okay, so let's see if I got this right first try. No, oh, I didn't send a response, that's why. So let's redirect to the dashboard. And this is all kind of cheating because I'm just storing this in memory, but basically by doing this check here, we know that this whoever made this request, very likely, you can't say 100%, is that user. Because in order to have this value set, they needed to have a session set by us in either this login or this sign up. And if that's true, then basically the fact that we found that user that matches that session ID, we say, oh, cool, that user now has access to modify that user. So let's just say the user has account. So it won't exist initially. And then throw a increment, we'll put it here, I guess. That's fine. Okay. So there's no account, and now I can modify it. But if somebody else were, let's see, can I do this? Should be able to. So I do a new incognito. So now I'll make test 2. And now I'm in test 2. And you can see this guy's still got account 4, and this guy's undefined. If I increment here, I still get a 1, and he has a 4. And so this guy is only able to modify his own count versus this guy is only able to modify his count. And they're both hitting the same route, but because of this check, it's able to determine who that user actually is. And then if somebody had no, actually this should work, yeah. If somebody somehow made it to this page, which they shouldn't in the first place, but if they did, and they don't actually have a session at all, hitting this will just throw an error because they don't have access to modify anything. I think that's going to be roughly where I cap this, but I'll kind of go over some of the lingering like pieces or things to be aware of. So kind of part of the reason I wanted to put this together is people both rightly and incorrectly like put a lot of fear around the authentication process, and 100% there's a lot of things that can go wrong. But I think it is important for everyone to understand how it works, because if you don't understand how it works, you're actually probably more likely to create some kind of a problem elsewhere in your application anyways. And so having a solid understanding is extremely important. But just to go through like some of the problems that still kind of remain in this like really basic implementation, and I'm sure people could probably come up with more, so let's see, on sign up here, if somebody else signed up, it would create another user with the same username. And so what would need to happen here is add check for username already exists. Because without that, and this is also kind of an important skill, is knowing what the consequences of an error like that actually are. And so with the way this is implemented, first person came in, let's again say they created a username test and they moved on with their life. Now a second person comes in, they also create a username test with their own password. And this one's got a couple interesting pieces. So they will initially get their session set to that new user ID. And so you'll have two users with the same username, but this person will correctly get the ID of the one that was just created. And so things will kind of be okay in that spot. What problem we'll probably be run into is on login, after that person gets logged out or chooses to log out, they will, let's see what's going to happen. So, and this would depend on how your like data store is set up, but this one's like pretty simple. So we just have an array of our users, and so it's going to go through them in the order that they were created. And so when that second person tries to log in, it's only ever going to find the first user. And so despite that person thinking that they have an account under that username, and technically speaking they do, it would find the first one first, and unless they happen to make the same password, then that person's not going to be able to log back into their account, which is actually better than a couple different ways that otherwise could have gone. Like, depending on a few circumstances, it possibly could have been possible for that person to log into the other person's account, even though they didn't have access to it. So that's an example. I didn't cover a log out, but I believe I can just quickly discuss that. So a log out would be destroy, unset, store.destroy, delete a session, clear. Cheating with ChatGPT. rec.session.destroy. So we had a log out route, for example, and when somebody calls that, we do a still rec.session.destroy. And why it's not a promise is extremely annoying. Technically speaking, you would want to wait till it's done, and then you can redirect to sign up page. Makes no sense to take them back there, but we don't have anything else to really take them to. And then let's see, that's the dashboard that we're on. So just to try and test this out, add a, this is horrendous. Maybe this auto format will help. No. Just make this a little prettier for now. So, and sure. Okay, and now we're logged in. have that cookie, log out. That would help if I spelled it correctly. Because I changed it, I guess. Yeah. Okay. I have session ID. I log out. It's a little interesting that it still seems to have a session. I would assume, could be wrong. Yeah, that I no longer exist. So that might have to do with, did say save uninitialized. I kind of would have expected this to go away. Oh, here it is. This is probably a setting. Unset, control the result of unsetting through delete. Default value is keep. So I think if we were to do set, this is at this point just for learning purposes. Destroy or keep. So sorry. Okay, and let's find out if that does what I thought. Still no. Interesting. But I can confirm that I am no longer that person. So what it's likely doing, oh, I think this is true, is no matter what, it's creating a session on all of these requests. And so maybe even, let's try this. I were to come here. So before I was putting the session before the static files, which might mean even accessing a static file is trying to create a session. This is so irrelevant, but here we are. Okay, so logged in. Now I log out. Okay. Anyways, doesn't matter. I'm gonna cap it at that. There's probably even more things, but I think that's kind of a reasonable start. And there was a specific person who asked me to kind of go through this, and so what I'll probably do is send this. If or when they watch it, I'll see kind of like what's missing or what things I should cover, and then maybe we can do another one. So thanks for checking this out, and yeah, have a wonderful day.